When you hear the Minister of Canadian Heritage is introducing someone to Parliament Hill, you might expect a renowned Canadian of the so-called higher arts, maybe a musician, a visual artist, literary virtuoso perhaps. But today, the Heritage Minister, James Moore's special guest, is a virtuoso in the art of a less exalted but a hugely popular sport. It's called mixed martial arts. Georges St-Pierre is an icon around the world in what is often a controversial sport. He holds numerous titles, including the World Welterweight Champion and the 2009 Fighter of the Year. Now, mixed martial arts is still shunned in parts of Canada. It's banned in Ontario, for example, but it is the fastest growing sport in the world, which makes Mr. St-Pierre perhaps one of the best known Canadians on the planet. I'm joined now by Minister James Moore and Georges St-Pierre, world champion. Champ, good to see you again. Always good to talk to you. Usually I see you in the octagon. What's more dangerous, George, Parliament Hill or the octagon?
I don't know. It's both are pretty dangerous, I guess.
Minister Moore, why have you brought now a legendary athlete, Georges St-Pierre, to Parliament Hill today?
Well, he's Canadian Athlete of the Year 2 years in a row. He's well-known internationally, and I think Canadians should get to know some of their greatest talent. And Georges St-Pierre is a great spokesperson. He spoke to some young students out here in front of Parliament Hill, met with some Parliament Hill staffers and members of Parliament, and he's a great ambassador. He's a world-class athlete, and he's a great gentleman. And I think more Canadians should get to know him. And obviously, the sport of mixed martial arts is probably the fastest-growing sport in the world. And Georges St-Pierre is one of the best spokespersons for it, and he's the best-known athlete in the fastest-growing sport in the world, and he's a Canadian. So we should obviously shine a bit of a spotlight on him.
Yeah, and George, you get a lot of attention, obviously, around the world. Here, the organization that obviously you fight for, the league you fight in, the UFC, the President Dana White continually comes to Canada because he wants to open up markets and make sure that you can fight in provinces like Ontario. It's currently banned in Ontario. What would you say to Canadians who support the ban to UFC?
Well, I'm very confident that it's only a matter of time, and right now it's sad because I'm not the only athlete in mixed martial art in Canada. There is so much talent in here. It's amazing. People have no idea how many good athletes in mixed martial art we have. It's one of the sports that we have the most success if it becomes legalized in Ontario. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the next few weeks, few months.
And this is obviously part of it. Minister, the Premier of Ontario, Dalton McGuinty, has said legalizing this is not a priority. And part of people say that it falls under the criminal code of prize fighting, which is outlawed. What's your view? I mean, it's allowed in places like Montreal and now in Vancouver, the city itself. Yeah. Are you working hard to get this to Ontario and places like Toronto?
Well, look, the criminal code is a matter for the Justice Minister to talk about, but Dalton McGuinty has taken one position, but it should be noted that Tim Hudak, the provincial Conservative leader there in Ontario, has said that he wants to bring it to Ontario. So by no means is the door closed to the province of Ontario. This upcoming weekend, there's going to be a third show of the UFC in Montreal. There's one coming up in Vancouver, and there are mixed martial arts events happening all over the province of British Columbia. So the reality is, province by province, there's a bit of a hodgepodge of regulations going on. And what we want to see happen, what I think should happen, at least in my province of British Columbia, is to have some proper regulation of this so the fighters are safe, so that people who like the sport can go watch and enjoy the sport. It can be properly sanctioned. And by the way, it's a huge economic generator. The show that is going to happen out in Vancouver in June sold out in 30 minutes, which is, to sell out 25,000 tickets in 30 minutes is pretty remarkable. Yeah. And it shows you the degree of popularity. So the public wants the sport, and I think the public also wants this sport to be safe and properly regulated, and I think that's only the responsible thing to do.
George, I saw you fight in that first big fight in Montreal. It was an unbelievable atmosphere there, George, but do you feel now that you have to be more than just the world champion? You have to almost be an ambassador, a political ambassador, because let's face it, there's a lot of controversy around this sport still, even though the jurisdictions that are banning mixed martial arts are fewer and fewer. But do you also have to be a bit of a politician, George?
I think it's part of my job to be good inside the octagon, but also be a good ambassador for the sport outside. A lot of people are looking up on me, and if I behave bad, because of me, a lot of people will behave bad as well. So as a role model and as a well-spoken person, I have to give a good example as well. It's part of my job.
I know you only got a few minutes left. Minister, some might ask, what is the Minister of Heritage, the guy in charge of culture, promoting mixed martial arts? Is that the kind of culture that you should be promoting?
We promote all kinds of culture, as you know. We're investing into museums, into festivals, into music, into dance, and all kinds of performing arts. We support all kinds of arts and culture. But I'm here as a member of Parliament and as a citizen of Vancouver who's a believer in the sport, and also I want to make sure that the sport is safe, properly regulated, and also welcome a Canadian. Minister of Canadian Heritage, and also welcoming the Canadian Athlete of the Year 2 years in a row to Parliament Hill. I think this is a good moment.
It's a great, now listen, he's got a lot of fans. People here in our studio are excited. Okay, let's just talk, one last question. Minister, you said that you tweeted yesterday, we talked a bit about it, the Habs are Canada's team, of course. This blew up into a kind of a fun hockey controversy. It's playoff time. Do you still believe the Canucks are Canada's team, Minister?
Well, I'm from Vancouver. I'm not going to apologize for supporting the Vancouver Canucks. Of course I do. Of course I was making fun. I was just teasing with some folks saying that the Canucks are Canada's team. But I obviously want to have a Montreal Canadiens Vancouver Canucks final, and maybe George and I can watch the final. We'll cheer for our teams, and we'll see who is Canada's team in the end, I suppose.
Well, George, I got to ask you. Are you a Canucks fan or a Habs fan?
Honestly, I used to be, when I was a kid, a Edmonton Oilers fans because of Gretzky, but now I root for, I cheer for the Montreal Canadian.
There you go. So how much would it cost me right now to ask you to put the minister in a headlock?
Evan, you're supposed to be, the CBC, you're supposed to be non-biased. You're supposed to support all this. We'll have a Canadiens-Canucks final. It'll be great, and and we'll see who wins.
There's no such thing as non-biased when it comes to hockey. You and I both know that. Georges St-Pierre, great pleasure to see you on Parliament Hill. Minister, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Just for the record, after that interview, Georges St-Pierre was mobbed on Parliament Hill by MPs, by staffers. It was interesting. We'll have a little more on that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's get back to Rosemary Barton. Ever feel like putting your MP in a headlock? Today, one Canadian...
actually.
Ever feel like putting the person you're sitting at the desk with in a headlock? One Canadian got a chance to throw his weight around Parliament Hill. The politicians were loving it. Rosemary, Georges St-Pierre was here.
Not my personal MP.
No.
Just MPs.
Right.
Yeah. Out of love.
Who did Georges St-Pierre, who I have watched fight from the UFC, the champion?
I don't really know. Like, I know his name, but I didn't really know who he was today. But he is the top pound-for-pound champion.
I like when you repeat things that you've just Googled. But he is a great fighter in mixed martial arts, and he is a
very talented,
superstar
super
in the
athlete.
world in a controversial sport.
That's right. And politicians, many of them went bananas
to
for
your
him
shock,
today.
right?
No, not to my shock. I expected this. Look at the turnout. These are mostly staffers and MPs gathered insanely, like, to get autographs and get their photos taken. I think there's a really funny one of Stockwell Day here, who is equally fit, but probably still couldn't take him.
There's Justin Trudeau with him.
Trudeau. I don't know who that is.
Look at this, and of course.
Look at all these. Look at all this paraphernalia.
Now,
it's a big deal.
Now, Minister Moore, the Heritage Minister who was on the show, he's a huge UFC fan.
Huge fan. That's all he tweets about, almost, except for hockey.
Yeah, and I did a story on UFC years ago, and I immediately got an email from James Moore saying, "I love the UFC. Do you love the UFC?" And we both seen him fight, and you should see. I mean,
it scares me.
The crowds go absolutely bananas for Georges St-Pierre. He is a great fighter.
Okay, I have another little TMI.
Okay,
tonight.
go ahead.
Okay, because some people.
Oh wait, let me just show before you do. Let's just show you a picture of Stockwell Day because he really got a kick out of Georges St-Pierre. Do we have this? Watch this. This is Georges St-Pierre putting him
in some sort of move.
It could be an arm bar. No.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
He's tapping him out. It's not an arm bar. And there's Justin Trudeau. Well, this is good. Look at this. Everybody wants to get in. Okay, what's this other?
There's Navdeep.
Yeah, there's Navdeep Bains, a Liberal. Okay, and look at there's
signing
Georges
autographs,
St-Pierre
but huge crowds for him.
Yeah, there you go.
I've never seen crowds like that up there. Seriously.
Okay.